week 4 of the fantasy football season, and here's tight end start sits every matchup this week. The first one, Detroit Lions at the Green Bay Packers, Thursday Night Football. So Sam Laporta, so far, he's been one of the best tight ends in fantasy football in his rookie season here. So right now, the number 2 option on this Detroit Lion offense, and last week he had over 70 yards and found the end zone on 7 catches, was Laporta. So this week here in a pretty decent matchup in a ball game that could be pretty high scoring on Thursday Night Football, where we know there's less defense in those ball games on the short week. Laporta, once again, he's a starting tight end, and this week he's most likely going to be in the top 5, top 6 in the rankings at the position. Now Luke Musgrave, he's a borderline option for me. So far for the rookie tight end, he's been pretty decent in the first 3 games of his NFL career. And right now at the tight end position in fantasy football, we're starting to see a youth movement and guys coming up from college or even second-year guys and playing good football for their team. So right now, him and Jordan Love have a decent rapport. A couple decent games and 1 bad game so far as Musgrave. But this week, versus a Lion team that's pretty decent on defense so far this season, and with Christian Watson supposedly coming back in this ball game, we got to see if Musgrave's still going to get targets and a decent amount of looks. With Watson back in the lineup if he plays in this one. Now, Atlanta Falcons at the Jacksonville Jaguars in the London ball game. Kyle Pitts, it's been tough so far this season to have him on your fantasy team. Only 9 catches on the season and 2 pretty poor performances, and last week was the best game of the year here for Kyle Pitts, where he had 8.70 fantasy points in PPR league. So yes, he'll probably crack my top 15 in the rankings, but with his quarterback Desmond Ridder not being a good quarterback, his ceiling's pretty low in my opinion, where Pitts will probably top out at most 8 to 10 fantasy points. So this week he's a borderline option. Evan Ingram, one of the mainstays in this offense here for this Jacksonville Jaguar team. And him and Trevor Lawrence, they've had good chemistry ever since midseason last year. So right now, while Evan Ingram's playing good football, last week another good ball game and a pretty good matchup here versus middle of the pack Atlanta defense. I have him as a start. Now to the Baltimore Ravens at the Cleveland Browns. Mark Andrews, we know he's a top 2, top 3 tight end week in and week out for fantasy owners. And this week here, once again, he's a start. I know last week wasn't a great game, but he's still not 100% as well, I believe, Andrews. We know he missed week 1 with the injury, but this week here, I think he's a little bit healthier. Things going in this Raven team, they got to pass the football better. We didn't see much out of them last week in a bad loss versus the Indianapolis Colts in Baltimore. So this week here, I think they rely on Andrews a little bit more. He's a starting. David Njoku, he's just not getting it going with Deshaun Watson. So right now, there's not much to say about Njoku. Really can't trust him week in and week out. He's not putting up the fantasy points. The targets haven't been there. And the Browns, they're going in a different direction the way they're passing the ball to obviously Amari Cooper. Obviously, as well, they're going with Elijah Moore, who's getting more play, and Donovan Peoples-Jones. So right now is a 4th or 5th option in this offense. David Njoku's not really a tight end that I'm going to put out there in my lineup. And he's a sit this week now to the Rams at the Indianapolis Colts. Pretty straightforward. Tyler HIGBEE, one of the mainstays and targets in this offense here for this Ram team. And he's coming off a solid ball game on Monday Night Football in Week 3 at the Bengals. So right now, Tyler HIGBEE's working the middle of the field. Defenses are now rolling coverage towards Puka Nacua even more after the first 2 weeks he went off. And in Week 3, he still had a decent ball game, but nothing out of control. So HIGBEE this week's a start. Indoor ball game, always a plus. Now to the Colts, Kylan Granson, not really a tight end making plays and getting the football. I know he scored a touchdown a few weeks ago, but if he didn't do that, he really didn't do much for fantasy owners. So right now, he's not on the radar. And this Colt team, they're really not getting the ball to anyone besides Michael Pittman in that offense in the passing game. So right now, you can't trust Granson. He's a sit. Now to the Vikings at the Panthers, TJ Hawkinson, he's a top 3, top 5 tight end at worst. He's a mainstay in this offense. They signed him to a big extension for a reason. And him and Kirk Cousins, only in a short amount of time since trade deadline last season to now this year, have good chemistry. And he definitely relies on TJ Hawkinson on making big plays, and especially in the red zone. So he's a start. Hayden Hurst is a sit for me in this one. Hayden Hurst, I know he had a pop game in Week 1, but ever since then, we really haven't seen much out of Hayden Hurst. Even if Andy Dalton starts this ball game, and he's a veteran quarterback who obviously knows how to get the ball to his receivers a little bit differently than a Bryce Young, I just can't trust Hayden Hurst in this one, because he'll have a pop game here and there, but the main guys in this offense is Miles Sanders and Adam Thielen, and some DJ Chark is well working his way in the offense after missing the first game with injury. Now to the Bengals at the Titans. Irv Smith Jr. is a sit for me. Pretty much the tight end in this offense has been non-existent for the Cincinnati Bengal team. And Irv Smith, he's got a lot of talent, but he just never has done nothing with it. Injuries and just not playing well has been a problem with his Minnesota Viking days. And now here with the Bengals, he's a Sid Chiga Kongwo, pretty much no one in this Titan offense besides Derrick Henry you really could trust right now this season. DeAndre Hopkins hasn't done much. Traylon Burks, I thought he could take the next step this season. He hasn't done much. And Chiga Kongwo, we saw some decent ball games out of him last season, but this year he's not doing much for this team, and he's just sitting out to the Bucs at the New Orleans Saints. Cade Otton, he'll have a decent ball game here and there every few weeks, but he's not going to be a consistent fantasy player. Pretty much this offense is all Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, it seems like, with Baker Mayfield on the center, which there's nothing wrong with it. But Baker, he was never really a guy that targeted the tight end much. So Cade Otton in a pretty tough matchups to sit in this one for the Bucs at the Saints. And now to the Saints, Jawan Johnson's a sit as well. Last season, Johnson, he was pretty solid with Andy Dalton for most of the season. I'm Taysom Hill, a quarterback. But so far this season, we haven't seen much out of Johnson. Looks like Derek Carr might miss this ball game where they elevated one of these quarterbacks off the practice squad. But either way, with Jameis Winston, maybe he gets a few more targets in this game. But he's a tough tight end to trust. So he's a sit this week. Now to the Dolphins at the Bills, possibly the game of the week here between these AFC East rivals. So the Dolphins, after coming off a 70-point game, Durham Smythe, he didn't really do anything in that one. So right now, after an offensive explosion and you're not being part of it, putting 70 points on the board, he's not a tight end that I could trust. And I thought the first few weeks he was going to be a tight end that could break out for this team, but obviously that hasn't been the case so far in the first 3 weeks here of the season. So he's just sitting out to Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox. They're both sits for me. Just not consistent enough in this Bill offense of making plays and getting the football. And the other thing is here, Stephon Diggs is pretty much getting most of these plays in this offense. Him and James Cook, a majority of the offense for this Buffalo Bill team. So right now I thought Kincaid would be a big factor this season, but so far in the early going, he hasn't been. And obviously he could get things going as the season goes on, is the rookie. But right now, just no interest in starting him. He's a sit. Now to the Broncos at the Bears, Adam Trautman, he's a sit for me in this one. He really hasn't done much so far this season. Russell Wilson's really targeting Cortland Sutton, Marvin Mims, and Jerry Jeudy for the most part on this team, and Samaje Perine. So right now, Adam Trautman hasn't done anything over the last few weeks. Dolchik's really the receiving tight end on this team, but obviously he's on IR with injury. Now to the Bears, Cole Kmet, a borderline option. There's pretty much no one on this Bear team I could trust besides DJ Moore in this offense to go out there and make plays. Cole Kmet, he had a decent 2 PPR games to start the season. Last week didn't do much. This week I know it's a pretty decent matchup versus the Broncos, who just got torched for 70 points obviously by the Dolphins, but this bad offense just can't move the football. Justin Fields is struggling mightily, and Cole Kmet, he could be a guy that's going to put up some decent points some weeks, and some weeks he's not going to do much, and his ceiling really isn't that high. So he's a sit for me. Now to the Commanders at the Philadelphia Eagles. Thomas, I know he's playing better football this season and staying healthy, but he's still not a tight end I would trust 12-14 team leagues to go out there and make plays. And right now he's an easy sit in a tough matchup versus a good defense. And the same with John Bates, because both these players pretty much just sharing snaps, and their targets have been pretty similar over the last few weeks. So right now, they're both sits for me with a tough matchup with Philly and Dallas Goedert. So far, we haven't seen the big ball game or a touchdown out of Goedert, but the last 2 weeks, he's at least had 8 or more fantasy points, is Goedert. And we know this Philadelphia Eagles team's a high-powered offense, a lot of weapons, and a lot of mouths to feed over there for Jalen Hurts, with A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Goddard, DeAndre Swift, who's running like a madman in the backfield. So right now, I still have belief in Goddard, and it wouldn't be surprising to me if he has a breakout game any week now, with so far the last 2 weeks just being a mediocre game. Now to the Steelers at Texans, Pat Freiermuth coming off a ball game at the Vegas Raiders, where he found the end zone in that one. An alright Texan defense. I think he could have a good ball game once again as Freiermuth. We know him and Kenny Pickett have a decent rapport. And I always say a young quarterback's best friend and security blanket is the tight end. So this week here in a pretty good matchup at the Texans. Another ball game where they're going to be out Deontay Johnson, obviously, is a Steeler team. Someone's going to have to pick up the slack a little bit. And I think it could be Freiermuth a little bit. So he's a start. Dalton Schultz, I've said it week in and week out, he was a product of the Dallas Cowboys system. And Dak Prescott liking to target the tight end, but CJ Stroud really hasn't looked Dalton Schultz way. They paid him a big contract in the offseason. But right now, he's not making plays and doing anything for fantasy owners. So he's a sit for me. Now to the Raiders. At the Chargers, not much going on in this ball game. Michael Mayer, the rookie tight end, he hasn't done much of the season, with the passing game pretty much consisting of Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers, and Jacobs has been a little bit better as a receiver out of the backfield. So right now, we're not going to see Michael Mayer do much for this Vegas Raider team. As the season goes on, possibly he can. But right now, he's not going out there making plays or even getting targeted much. He's more of a decoy than anything. And like I said, Myers and Adams, the two main targets, and rightfully so, in this offense. Now to the Chargers, Gerald Everett is sit for me. He's pretty much only getting 3 or 4 catches a game with 20 to 30 yards is Gerald Everett. And that's not really going to do much for fantasy owners. So right now, possibly his targets could go up, obviously, with Mike Williams out for the season with a torn ACL. But this week here, even in a plus matchup versus a weak rated defense, he's not a tight end that could trust he's a sit. And his counterpart is backup tight end, Donald Parham. I know he has 3 touchdowns on the season, but he's pretty much been a red zone threat or nothing for this Charger team. So right now, Parham, I said he was available on the waiver wire in 99% of fantasy leagues coming into the week, but he's not really a tight end you could depend on. His stats have been fluky. The last ball game, 2 catches, 4 yards, and 2 touchdowns versus the Minnesota Vikings. And obviously, if you don't get those touchdowns, he didn't do anything, so he's hard to trust. And a sit for me. Now to the Cardinals. At the 49ers, Zach Ertz, the first 2 weeks of the season, he had a lot of targets. He had a decent amount of catches, but last week versus a tough Dallas Cowboy defense, we didn't see much out of Zach Ertz. So right now, he takes a little bit of bump down in the rankings here. But if you need a tight end, I think Zach Ertz could bounce back. I know it's another tough matchup versus a tough defense, even though this Cardinal offense had their way with the Dallas Cowboys in week 3. But right now, Zach Ertz, he's a borderline option for me. I know he's definitely not 100% coming off the knee injury last season, but he's still a guy who can use his mind and route running ability, get open, and make catches. George Kittle's a start. The first 2 weeks, we know Kittle didn't do much, but last week he erupted for 7 catches and 90 yards. And this San Francisco offense is loaded, obviously. Brock Purdy, perfect fit for the system here. George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel in that offense, and CMC being the main man out of the backfield and catching the football as well there. So right now with a loaded offense, George Kittle pretty much can roam the middle of the field and get one-on-one coverage most nights here. He's definitely a start for me as Kittle. Now to the Patriots at the Dallas Cowboys. Hunter Henry last week was a down ball game for him, but the conditions weren't that good, and he versed a great defense in the New York Jets. But this week here in a dome and indoors in Jerry World, Hunter Henry, I think, could get back on track and make some plays in this ball game. And he's a tight end I'm going to start. I'm not going to say he's going to put up huge numbers, but definitely a guy in the top 10, top 12 ranking I like this week, so he's a start. Now to Jake Ferguson of the Cowboys, he's a start for me. Ferguson, he's been the second reliable target option on this Dallas Cowboy team behind CeeDee Lamb this season. And we know Dak Prescott, he always liked the tight end, going back to Jason Witten days, Dalton Schultz over the last few seasons. And now Jake Ferguson's getting targets, and he's making plays for this Dallas Cowboy team. So even in a pretty tough matchup here versus the Patriots, I got him a start in this one. Now to the Chiefs at the Jets, Sunday Night Football. Travis Kelce, obviously the first tight end taken off the board in fantasy drafts. Best tight end in the league easily. And once again this week here, I think he rolls and finds the end zone in this one, even though it's versus a tough Jet defense. Now to the Jets, Tyler Conklin is a sit for me. I think Conklin's going to have a few pop games here and there this season with Zach Wilson. But Zach Wilson's one of the worst starting quarterbacks in the league. This Jet offensive line obviously isn't good at all, not blocking him and giving him time. And Tyler Conklin, he'll get 3 or 4 catches probably in this game, but his ceiling really isn't that high as well. So this week is a sit, but if we soon see more out of him, he could be a start down the line. Now the final game of the week, Monday Night Football. Seattle Seahawks at the New York Giants. Noah Fant, the last 2 weeks, he's starting to get into the playbook a little more, and he's getting targets here from Geno Smith. And obviously, defenses, they're going to roam to DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Smith-Jababa even, and try to stop Kenneth Walker out of the backfield. So Fant, he's been working the middle of the field, and he's had 8 fantasy points plus in the last 2 weeks. And this week here, pretty good matchup on paper versus the New York Giant defense that so far this season hasn't stopped anyone. The Cowboys week 1 scoring 40, week 2 the Cardinals 28, and then week 3 here the San Francisco 49ers took care of business, putting up 30 points. So this week here, I think Fan can have another decent ball game. By 100%, don't trust him as a full-fledged start, so he's a borderline option And Darren Waller, he's a start for me in this one. Right now, he's the best receiver on this Giant roster is Darren Waller. I know last week was a little bit of a rough game for him, dropping a couple passes that he should have caught. But this week in a potential shootout on Monday Night Football, I think Waller can have a good ball game, and he's still a tight end that's probably going to be ranked in my top 5, top 6 this week. So that's tight end start sits every matchup for week 4 of the fantasy football season.